When you observe correctly, quantum reality begins to transform. If your gaze has stopped on these lines at precisely this moment in time, know that you stand on the threshold of a discovery capable of fundamentally transforming the very nature of your interaction with reality. And this is not about external actions, not about exhausting exertions of will, and not about forcing circumstances to change through brute force. No, it is about a precise, almost surgical mechanism of observation, an instrument of which most people are not even aware, though they use it every second of their lives. There exists a completely unique, specific way to observe the surrounding reality. And when you master this way, the quantum field, that very invisible matrix from which all manifested reality is woven, begins to reorganize. It restructures itself. It literally rewrites what you perceive as the unchangeable circumstances of your life. This is not yet another technique of positive thinking where you're offered to smile while ignoring problems. And it is not visualization in the classical sense, when you imagine what is desired, hoping it will someday materialize. No, this is quantum mechanics, real, proven science, acting directly at the level of your consciousness, at the level of how you perceive the world. When you observe correctly, you are no longer a passive witness to an already existing frozen reality. In that moment, you become an active creator. You literally create reality through the very act of your observation. Every glance, every directed attention, every conscious or unconscious expectation, all of this shapes the fabric of your experience here and now. Do you remember the famous double slit experiment? That very experiment, which definitively and irrevocably proved that observation influences the observed. Quantum particles behave as waves of probability, blurred, indefinite, existing simultaneously in multiple states until the observer's gaze is directed upon them. But in that very moment, when the act of observation occurs, the wave collapses. Particles instantly transform into concrete, definite points of matter. But here is what the vast majority of people overlook when they hear about this experiment. They think, yes, observation influences particles. So what? They don't understand the depth of this discovery. It is important not merely that you observe it all. It is critically important how exactly you observe. The quality, direction, and expectation of your observation determines what exactly reality collapses into, what form, what circumstance, what experience. Incorrect observation creates one reality, heavy, limited, full of obstacles. Correct observation creates something entirely different, light, fluid, filled with possibilities. And the paradox is that it is one and the same quantum field, the same potential possibilities, hovering in a state of quantum uncertainty. But the manner in which you observe determines which possibility will become your experienced, tangible reality. Why did you encounter this message at precisely this moment? Do you think it's a random YouTube algorithm recommendation or social media suggestion? No. Algorithms are merely an instrument through which a deeper force operates. Consciousness finds information resonating with its current frequency through the mechanism of quantum resonance. Like attracts, like not at the physical level, but at the level of consciousness vibrations. You are here reading these words because your consciousness has already reached a certain level of frequency. That level at which not merely intellectual understanding of correct observation becomes possible, but its deep inner recognition. That level where quantum mechanics can be applied by you consciously, purposefully, rather than functioning as an automatic, unconscious process, which it has been all your previous life. Had you not been ready to learn how observation creates reality, these words would have remained merely beautiful but empty phrases for you. Abstract concepts with no practical significance. Philosophy without application. But you are ready, and therefore everything you now learn, every principle, every nuance, every distinction between correct and incorrect observation, all of this will transform how you create your reality through every moment of observation, through every instant of conscious attention. The problem of incorrect observation. Let's be honest. Have you ever noticed a strange pattern? When you look directly, intently at your problems, they seem to intensify. When you concentrate on lack of money, the lack somehow becomes even more acute. Unexpected bills appear, deals fall through, opportunities pass you by. When you actively search for confirmation of your limitations, physical, financial, social, these limitations are confirmed again and again with almost eerie precision. You probably thought this was confirmation bias, a psychological trick, where the brain simply selects from the flow of information what matches your beliefs, or selective attention when you notice only what you're tuned to. But no, this is not psychology. This is quantum observation in action. This is you creating the reality that reflects with mathematical precision the way you observe. You observed incorrectly. Your entire life, year after year, you unconsciously used observation to strengthen the already existing state of affairs. Instead of applying this most powerful instrument to create what you truly want, you used it to confirm what you don't want, and the field obediently responded to your way of observing, materializing exactly what you expected to find. Research by Dr. Dean Radin from the Institute of Noetic Sciences. This is not marginal pseudoscience. These are thousands of strictly controlled experiments whose results are reproducible and measurable. His work definitively proved consciousness directly, physically affects quantum systems through intention and observation. His research shows something revolutionary. The way the observer observes, the intention standing behind the act of observation, the expectation during observation, the state of consciousness of the observer at the moment of observation. All of this measurably affects quantum results. This is not belief, not hope, and not psychological self-deception. This is real physical impact of consciousness on matter confirmed by instruments, numbers, statistics. Stay with me until the end of this video, because it will reveal principles that can change your life. Subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and leave any comment. For example, 3 sevens. This helps algorithms show the video to those searching for answers. Now think honestly. How do you observe your life circumstances? When you look at your financial situation, relationships, health, career, do you observe to confirm what already exists? To gather evidence of current reality? To see things soberly, realistically, as they are? If yes, then you are using observation completely incorrectly. You apply it to fix reality in its current, often undesirable configuration. Instead of using observation as a tool for creating new reality, you have turned it into a mechanism for preserving the old. Observation that confirms what already exists only strengthens the old reality, cements it, makes it immobile and frozen. But observation that expects something different, that is directed toward finding a new possibility, It collapses that new possibility from the quantum field directly into your physical experience. One and the same act of observation, one and the same situation, but completely different results. It all depends on the way of observation, on what exactly you expect to discover when you direct your attention to reality. We have approached a critical point of understanding, that moment when abstract theory becomes concrete practice, when quantum physics descends from laboratories and textbooks directly into your everyday life. Because everything you just read is not philosophy. It is science. Measurable, reproducible, strictly proven science. Dr. Dean Radin's research and scientific foundation. Dr. Dean Radin, senior scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences in California, has devoted decades to systematic, careful investigation of one single question. Can human consciousness physically affect quantum systems? Not theoretically, not hypothetically, but actually, measurably, using precise instruments and statistical analysis. His work did not begin with mysticism, not with esotericism, not with a desire to prove something incredible. It began with honest scientific curiosity. If the double-slit experiment shows that observation collapses the wave function, then what exactly in the act of observation causes this collapse? Physical presence of the instrument, or the consciousness behind the instrument? The intention of the observer? Their expectation? Their state of mind at the moment of observation? Radin developed a series of experiments that isolated variables one by one. He used random number generators, quantum devices whose behavior is based on unpredictable quantum events. By definition, these devices should produce absolutely random sequences, 50% ones, 50% zeros. Perfect randomness, no patterns, no predictability. But when people directed their intention toward these generators, simply sat nearby and held the mental intention to increase the quantity of ones or zeros without touching the device, without physically interacting with it, the results deviated from randomness, statistically significantly, reproducibly, again and again. This was not dramatic deviation. The quantum field does not submit to the brute force of desire. The deviation was subtle, almost unnoticeable, just a few percentage points. But mathematically, statistically, it was impossible to explain by randomness. The probability that such results were obtained by chance was millions to one. Consciousness affected the quantum system. Intention changed physical reality. But Radin went further. He wanted to understand not simply what happens, but how exactly it works. Which factors amplify the effect? Which weaken it? What makes observation effective, and what turns it into a waste of energy? And here is what he discovered. Intention alone is insufficient. It takes more than mere desire. The key factor proved to be expectation. People who simply wanted to influence the generator but did not expect results, did not believe in a possibility of influence, obtained minimal deviations. Their consciousness sent a mixed signal: I want to, but I don't believe this is possible. And the field responded to this mixed signal with a minimal, almost imperceptible effect. But people who held simultaneously intention and expectation, those who not only wanted, but expected that influence would occur, inwardly knew that consciousness is capable of changing the result. They demonstrated significantly stronger deviations. Their consciousness sent a pure, undistorted signal. I intend, and I know this works. And the field responded accordingly. This was a revolutionary discovery because it explained why most people attempting to apply visualization, the law of attraction, or positive thinking fail. They use intention without expectation. They want, but they don't believe. They direct desire, but simultaneously radiate doubt. And the quantum field, responding to the full spectrum of their signal, materializes exactly this contradiction. Weak, inconsistent, disappointing results. Radin's next discovery was even more practical. He found that the state of consciousness of the observer is critically important. People in states of stress, anxiety, internal resistance demonstrated weak influence on quantum systems. Their consciousness was fragmented, scattered, filled with contradictory signals. Even when they held intention and expectation at the surface level, the deeper layers of their psyche transmitted doubt, fear, tension. But people in a state of coherence, internal harmony, where thoughts, emotions, and expectations are aligned in one direction, demonstrated powerful, stable influence. Their consciousness functioned as a laser, not an ordinary light bulb. A laser is coherent light, where all photons move in one direction with the same frequency. An ordinary light bulb is incoherent light, scattered in all directions. Both emit light, but a laser can pierce steel, while a light bulb merely illuminates a room. So too with consciousness. Scattered, contradictory, fragmented consciousness radiates a weak, incoherent signal to the quantum field. It illuminates possibilities, but does not collapse them into reality with any real force. Coherent consciousness, aligned, harmonized, internally convinced, radiates a powerful, focused signal that does not merely illuminate possibility, it attracts it, collapses it, materializes it with relentless precision. Quantum superposition and how reality works. Now, let us turn to the concept of superposition. This is one of the most important principles of quantum mechanics, and understanding its nature completely changes how you interact with reality. Until the moment of observation, a particle does not exist in one definite state, but simultaneously in all possible states. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal description of quantum reality. Imagine a coin flipped into the air. In ordinary, classical reality, a coin at every moment in time is either heads up or tails up, even if you cannot see it in flight. There exists a definite state, simply hidden from your view. But a quantum particle in a state of superposition is not like this coin. It is not a hidden heads or hidden tails. It literally is both heads and tails simultaneously, mathematically, physically, really. Moreover, a quantum particle in superposition does not exist merely in two states like a coin. It exists in an infinite spectrum of possible states simultaneously. Everything that theoretically could happen to this particle already exists as potential reality in the superposition. All trajectories, all positions, all energy levels, all simultaneously interwoven into a single quantum state of indefiniteness. And here is what is critically important. Superposition collapses at the moment of observation. An infinite spectrum of possibilities instantly shrinks to one single reality. But into which exactly? This is where the manner of observation comes into play. The quantum field does not choose randomly. It responds to the frequency of the observer's consciousness, to their expectation, to the state of their internal coherence. If you observe with expectation of a problem, the field collapses into that version of superposition which contains the problem. If you observe with expectation of a solution, the field collapses into that version of superposition which contains the solution. Both versions existed as potential before the moment of your observation, but your observation chose which of them will become your experienced reality. This means something shocking. Your current life situation is not the only possible reality. It is merely one of an infinite number of versions that simultaneously existed in quantum superposition until you began observing it. Right now, at this very moment, there exists a version of reality where you have sufficient money, a version where your relationships are harmonious, a version where your health is strong, a version where your career flourishes. These versions will not appear in the future if you work hard. They already exist now, in parallel, in a state of quantum potentiality. The only thing that determines which version you collapse into is your manner of observation. If you continue observing reality through the lens of lack, problems, and limitations, you will repeatedly collapse into that version of superposition that contains lack, problems, and limitations. Not because other versions don't exist, but because your observation selects precisely this one. But if you begin observing differently with expectation of abundance, solutions, possibilities, you will begin collapsing into other versions of superposition, those that were always nearby but remained unmanifested because your way of observation was never tuned to them. This is not magic and not self-deception. This is the literal mechanism of how the quantum field functions. Superposition is real. Wave function collapse is real. Observer influence is real. And the practical application of these principles to your everyday life is not merely possible, it is inevitable. You already apply them every second. The question is merely whether you do so consciously, directing the collapse toward desired reality, or unconsciously, repeatedly confirming the reality from which you wish to escape. The 7 phenomena of quantum observation. Theory without practice is merely an intellectual exercise, a beautiful concept that remains in the realm of abstractions. But when you begin applying correct observation to your life, you encounter concrete, measurable, repeating phenomena. These are not random coincidences. These are not placebo effects. These are systematic changes in reality that appear every time you observe correctly. There are 7 fundamental phenomena of quantum observation that you can detect, track, and use as markers that your observation is working. These phenomena manifest regardless of whether you believe in them or not, whether you understand their nature or not. They are direct consequences of how the quantum field responds to your manner of observation. First phenomenon, change in reality. When focus shifts. When you shift the focus of your observation from problem to solution, reality begins restructuring almost immediately. Not at the level of grand transformations. The quantum field works subtly through small changes which accumulate. First, details change, small circumstances, insignificant events, which most people don't even notice. But these small changes are not coincidence. They are the first signs that the field has begun collapsing into a different version of superposition. You observed differently, and reality responded. If you continue observing correctly, these small changes will begin accumulating, intensifying, growing into larger shifts. Imagine that you focused on lack of money for years. Every day you checked your balance with internal tension, counted how much remained until month's end, worried about bills. Your observation was tuned to lack, and the field, Responding to this observation continued materializing circumstances that confirmed the lack. But in that moment, when you consciously shift your focus, you begin observing not how much you lack, but how much you already have. Not the bills that must be paid, but the resources already present in your life. Reality begins to shift. First, subtly. Perhaps an unexpected discount in a store. Perhaps someone repays an old debt. Perhaps a small opportunity to earn appears. This is not psychology. This is not selective attention when you simply begin noticing what was always there. These circumstances appear. They collapse from quantum probability into physical reality precisely because you changed your way of observation. Second phenomenon, influence of expectation on event outcomes. Expectation is not hope. Hope contains doubt. Hope says, I want this to happen, but I'm not sure it will. Expectation says, this will happen because such is the order of things. Expectation is inner certainty, which needs no proof because it is based on understanding how the field operates. When you observe an event with expectation of a certain outcome, the outcome begins leaning in the direction of your expectation. This doesn't mean you can control every variable. The free will of others, random factors, unforeseen circumstances, all continue to exist. But within the range of available probabilities, the field chooses the one that most matches the frequency of your expectation. Simple example, you drive to an important meeting. If you drive with expectation that you'll get stuck in traffic, be late. The meeting will be tense. Your observation is tuned to this version of reality, and the field, responding to your expectation, begins collapsing circumstances that lead precisely to this result. Lights turn red exactly when you approach. Traffic forms in your path. People at the meeting are in a tense state. But if you drive with expectation of ease, timely arrival, successful outcome, even not knowing exactly how it will happen, the field begins organizing circumstances differently. Lights switch at the right moment, traffic clears. You intuitively choose a different route. People at the meeting are in a pleasant, open state, not because you control these factors, but because your expectation created resonance with that version of superposition where these factors align favorably. Third phenomenon, change in people's behavior. This is one of the strangest and at the same time most observable phenomena of quantum observation. When you change your way of observing a person, the person themselves begins behaving differently, not because you spoke with them, not because you changed your behavior toward them, but because at the quantum level, all consciousness is interconnected, and your observation affects the field in which this person exists. If you observe someone as a source of problems, as a difficult person, as an obstacle, you collapse precisely this version of this person into your experience. Even if this person has other facets, other qualities, other ways of interaction, in your presence, the version manifests that you expect to see, because your observation selects it from the quantum superposition of possible behaviors. But when you begin observing this person differently, with expectation of cooperation, understanding, benevolence, you collapse a different version, and the person, without realizing it, begins behaving differently in your presence. Their words become softer, their reactions less defensive, their readiness to interact greater. This is not manipulation. You don't control their free will. You simply stop collapsing that version of their behavior which created conflict. Every person contains multiple versions in a state of superposition: kind version and cruel, generous and stingy, open and closed. Your observation chooses which of these versions will manifest in your experience. Fourth phenomenon: temporal synchronicities. When you observe correctly, events begin synchronizing with almost mathematical precision. You think of a person, and they call. You need information, and you happen to find it. You seek a solution, and it appears through what seemed an unrelated chain of events. Skeptics call this coincidence statistical randomness, that the brain interprets as meaningful. But when you begin tracking the frequency of these synchronicities, you notice a pattern. They don't appear randomly. They appear when you observe with expectation and coherence, and they disappear when you return to observation confirmation of the old reality. Quantum entanglement is not merely an exotic phenomenon limited to laboratory experiments. It is a fundamental property of reality. At the quantum level, everything is connected. An event here is connected with an event there. Your thought is connected with circumstance. Your intention is connected with what seems like external coincidence of circumstances. Correct observation intensifies this entanglement, makes it functional. You begin living in a state of flow where needed people, information, circumstances appear exactly when they're necessary, not because you planned it, but because your observation creates resonance, which organizes the field in your favor. Fifth phenomenon: change in perception of time. Time is not the rigid linear construct it seems. At the quantum level, past, present, and future exist simultaneously. This is not mysticism. This is a consequence of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. Your perception of time as a linear stream is a construction of consciousness, not an absolute characteristic of reality. When you observe correctly, you notice strange effects. A day that was supposed to be tense and short suddenly stretches. You accomplish far more than planned and don't feel rushed. Or conversely, a routine task that usually takes hours suddenly completes quickly, almost effortlessly. This is not illusion. This is the result of your observation collapsing that version of reality where time behaves differently, where there is enough of it, where it flows in resonance with your state, not against it. Sixth phenomenon: materialization of details. Correct observation manifests in details before major events. This is important to understand to avoid disappointment. Many people begin observing correctly, expecting instant dramatic changes. When this doesn't happen, they decide the method doesn't work and return to the old way of observing. But the quantum field works through details. A small opportunity here, a slight synchronicity there, unexpected help, chance discovery. These details are not trifles. They are building blocks of new reality. They appear first because the field restructures gradually, layer by layer. If you continue observing correctly, despite major changes not yet arriving, details begin accumulating. They arrange into patterns. Patterns strengthen. And at a certain moment, a threshold transition occurs. The cumulative effect of all these small changes leads to a major shift in reality. It is like building a structure. First, the foundation is laid. It's not visible above ground, but nothing stands without it. Then walls are raised, floor by floor, and only at the end does the impressive completed structure appear. The same with quantum observation. Details are the foundation, and first floors, they are necessary, and they prove the process is underway. Seventh phenomenon: Quantum feedback. This is the most subtle of all phenomena, and at the same time, the most powerful. When you observe correctly, the field begins giving you feedback. Not through words, not through obvious signs, but through intuitive impulses, sudden realizations, inner knowing of what to do next. You suddenly feel you should call a certain person, and this call opens a new opportunity. You intuitively choose a different route and avoid a serious problem. You suddenly understand the solution to a task you've struggled with for weeks. This feedback is not coincidence. It is the field interacting with your consciousness directly. Correct observation creates a state of coherence between your consciousness and the quantum field. In this state, the boundary between observer and observed blurs. You stop being a separate subject, looking at objective reality from outside. You become a participant whose consciousness is woven with the field, responds to it, and receives information from it. This feedback intensifies over time. The more you practice correct observation, the clearer the impulses become, the more precise intuition, the faster realizations. Ultimately, you begin living in constant dialogue with the field, where every step is supported, every decision directed, every need satisfied through elegant synchronization of circumstances. Personal experiments, practical application. Now allow me to share how all this works not in theory, not in laboratory experiments, but in real, everyday life, my life. Because understanding the mechanism is one thing, and direct encounter with its operation is something entirely different. Several years ago, I found myself at a point that could be called critical, not catastrophic, but precisely that threshold zone where old strategies stop working and new ones haven't yet been found. Finances were unstable, relationships tense, health questionable, and worst of all, the feeling that however hard I worked, however much effort I invested, reality remained heavy, resistant, as if I were trying to move through thick, viscous substance. Precisely during this period, I stumbled upon research on quantum mechanics as applied to consciousness. At first, it was pure curiosity, intellectual interest in exotic ideas. But the deeper I immersed myself in the material, the more I read Radin's work, studied double-slit experiments, analyzed the concept of superposition, the clearer I understood this is not abstract theory. This is a working mechanism. And if it works at the level of quantum particles, it must work at the level of macroscopic reality. Because macroscopic reality consists of quantum particles, I decided to test this systematically, not as a philosophical concept, but as a practical tool, not simply to believe in the idea, but to test it rigorously, tracking results. I began small, with situations where results are easy to measure, where it's impossible to deceive yourself with psychological explanations. Parking experiment. The first experiment was simple to the point of banality. Parking spaces in the city center where I lived were a chronic problem. Every time I went somewhere, I had to spend 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes searching for a space. Circle around a block, get nervous, be late. This was a stable, predictable problem. I decided to apply observation expectation. Before driving downtown, I began observing reality not as a deficit of parking spaces, but as abundance of possibilities. Not hoping to find a space, but expecting that the space already exists, waiting precisely for me. Not searching for it with tension, but moving toward it with inner confidence that it will manifest at the right moment. The first few times, nothing changed. I circled as long as always, but I didn't give up. I continued observing correctly despite the absence of immediate results, because I understood the field doesn't respond instantly to a new way of observing if the old way is ingrained by years of habit. But then strange things began happening. I'd drive up to the needed place and a car literally pulled out from the parking space at that very moment, freeing the perfect spot right in front of the entrance. Or I'd intuitively choose a different route and there'd be a free space, though I usually didn't go that way, or a space that looked occupied from a distance, upon approach, turned out to be free. At first, I explained it away as coincidence, statistical randomness. But the frequency of these coincidences was too high. I began keeping records. Out of 10 trips, 9 times I found a space within 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes immediately. This was statistically impossible, given the previous experience, where searching for space averaged 15 minutes. Moreover, when I forgot to observe correctly, when I returned to the old way of thinking, there won't be spaces I'll have to search long. The result immediately worsened. I circled the city again, wasted time, got nervous. The correlation between way of observation and outcome was too precise to be coincidence. Finance experiment, emboldened by parking results, I decided to apply the same principle to a more serious area, finances. At that time, I had a stable but limited income, approximately $2,847 a month. I knew this figure exactly because I tracked every income and expense. The sum was predictable. It didn't change for months. Stability, but no growth. I decided to apply the principle of correct observation to finances. I began observing my income not as a fixed, unchangeable amount, but as a current point in a spectrum of possibilities. The quantum field was giving me a specific income each moment because I expected precisely that sum. But there existed other versions of superposition where I received more. I began practicing observation of abundance, not visualizing large amounts of money, not resorting to positive thinking, simply shifting the focus of observation from how much I insufficiently earn to recognition that I already have resources at my disposal and paths exist for increasing income that I don't yet see, but which potentially exist in the field. The first month, nothing happened. I received exactly $2,847 as usual. I continued observing it correctly. 2 months in a row, nothing changed. I began doubting. Perhaps parking was simply a probability game and financial circumstances too complex. But I remembered what I had read in Radin's research. Results don't appear instantly. They appear when the new way of observing becomes sufficiently ingrained, when it stops being merely an intellectual idea and begins being a real inner conviction. In the 3rd month, a small synchronicity occurred. An acquaintance called with an offer of additional work, a simple, small project. $300. I could have refused. It seemed not worth it. But I agreed because I saw in this the first sign. Having received $300, I continued observing correctly, and then events began unfolding. Another offer, another project, unexpected repayment of money I had loaned, an interesting turn in my main work that opened a new income direction. By year's end, my income had grown by 42%. It increased from $2,847 to $4,041. It didn't happen suddenly. It happened gradually through a network of small circumstances and opportunities. But the direction was clear, and each event corresponded to what I expected to discover: opportunities for growth. Most importantly, I didn't change my behavior. I didn't start working more. I didn't take any earning courses. I didn't apply any clever strategies. The only thing I changed, my way of observation. I stopped observing financial reality as fixed, limited. I began observing it as dynamic, containing potential for growth. And the field responded to this, collapsing possibilities that already existed within it. Relationship experiment. These two experiments convinced me the mechanism works, but I wanted to test it at a more subtle level, at the level of human relationships, because finances are essentially interaction with circumstances, but relationships are interaction with other consciousnesses. Here the mechanism should be more complex. At that time, I was in a relationship that was becoming increasingly tense. My partner and I were constantly in a state of conflict. Each day seemed like we were preparing for the next argument. Our way of communicating had turned into minefields. Somewhere hidden here was hurt, there misunderstanding, here old grievances. And I realized I was observing her in a certain way. I began noticing all her shortcomings, all her wrong actions, everything that irritated me, and every word she spoke I interpreted through the filter of expectation of conflict. I was essentially observing that version of her that corresponded to my expectation of a problem, and she, as Radin's research showed, responded to this way of observations, manifesting precisely those qualities I expected. I decided to change my way of observation. I began consciously searching in her for those qualities I valued. I began remembering why I had fallen in love with her. I began observing her not as a source of problems, but as a person capable of understanding, of intimacy, of cooperation. Not denying her real shortcomings, I simply shifted focus to her strengths. The process was slower than with Parkin. This was predictable. The old way of observing was ingrained by months of conflict. But after 2 weeks, I noticed the first changes. Her reactions became softer, her words less sharp, her readiness to talk greater. After a month, our relationship underwent significant changes, not a miracle, not instant transformation to paradise, but a clear shift toward greater intimacy, greater understanding, greater harmony. And most astonishing, she didn't know I was changing my way of observation. I didn't tell her about it. I simply changed my inner attitude. This was the most convincing proof of all, because she didn't know about the experiments. She couldn't adjust to my expectations at a conscious level. But at the quantum level, at the level of consciousness, she responded to my new way of observation. Because all consciousness is interconnected, and my way of observation affected the field in which she existed. These 3 experiments convinced me definitively. Correct observation works. This is not magic and not psychology. This is direct application of quantum mechanics to everyday life. The question is not whether it works. The question is whether you will use this instrument consciously or continue using it unconsciously, creating reality you don't like. Now, when you understand a mechanism, when you know the 7 phenomena of correct observation, when you have seen how it works in practice, your responsibility changes. You can no longer blame circumstances. You can no longer blame other people. You can no longer believe that reality is objective and you simply had bad luck. Your reality is a reflection of your way of observation, Not always direct, not always immediate, but always precise. If you want to change reality, you must change your way of observation. This is the only lever that truly is in your hands. And if in this video you've heard information resonating with some deep part of your understanding, if you feel this is truth you have long suspected, then your consciousness is ready. You have reached that frequency where this information becomes not merely an intellectual idea, but an instrument for transformation. Apply this knowledge. Practice correct observation in your life. Track changes. Notice small details that begin appearing. Observe not with hope, but with expectation. Cultivate internal coherence, aligning your thoughts, emotions, and beliefs in one direction. And remember, you are not a magician, and reality does not submit to the brute force of desire. But you are a creator, interacting with an infinite field of possibilities through the mechanism of observation. And every moment when you observe consciously, you create your experience, your reality, your life. My deep gratitude for your attention. Subscribe to our channel for further videos on quantum observation, transformation of consciousness, and the hidden mechanisms of reality. Give us a like if this video has helped you. Leave comments. Your questions and thoughts help me create more useful content. 3 7s or 9 9s in the comments. A powerful way to activate quantum resonance with this video's theme.